The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched high above the crowds. Beings from across the galaxy filled the stone seats. Their eyes watched the center of the room where an old alien stood. His skin was gray and marked with scars. His 4 arms moved, slowly as he spoke. Kethvar had lived for over 200 years. He had fought in more wars than most beings could count. Today, he stood in this court not as someone being judged, but as someone who had seen things others had not. The prosecutor was a tall being with blue skin and large eyes. She wore the formal robes of the Galactic Council. Her voice rang clear through the hall. "Tell us about the humans," she said. "Tell us about their crimes during the war." Kethvar made a sound that might have been laughing, but there was no joy in it. His old eyes looked tired. "You asked the wrong question," he said. "You want me to tell you how the humans were cruel, how they broke the rules of war. But I was there. I saw what really happened." The hall grew quiet. Even the air seemed to hold still. 50 years ago we found their world," Kethvar continued. "Earth, a small blue planet far from the center of the galaxy. We thought they were just another primitive species. We were wrong." He moved closer to the center of the room. His voice grew stronger. "The devourer swarm had been eating our worlds for 300 years. Whole planets gone. Billions dead. We had fought them with everything we had, our best ships, our strongest warriors. Nothing worked. The war just went on and on." A being in the crowd made a low sound of fear. Everyone knew about the swarm. Everyone had lost someone to them. When we found the humans, we did what we always did. We told them they had to fight, join our war, help us hold the line against the swarm. They had no choice. Fight or die. Kethvar stopped walking. He looked up at the high ceiling of the hall. "I was there when we met their leaders. Commander Han Wu came to our ship. He was not tall. He did not look strong. But when he spoke, something in his voice made me listen." The prosecutor leaned forward. "What did he say?" He asked questions. Strange questions. Why had we been fighting for 300 years? What had we tried? What had failed? Why did we keep doing the same things over and over? The hall was so quiet that Kethvar's breathing could be heard. We told him that was just how war worked. You fight. You lose some battles. You win some battles. Time passes. The war continues. That is the way of things. Kethvar's 4 arms moved as he spoke. His old voice carried the weight of memory. "Commander." Han Wu looked at us like we had said something very strange. Then he spoke to his people in their own language. I learned later what he said. He said, "These people have been fighting the same war for 3 centuries, and they think that is normal." The prosecutor frowned. "What is wrong with a long war? Many conflicts last for generations." "That is what I thought then," Kethvar said. "That is what we all thought." But then Dr. Li Na stepped forward. She was their scientist, their expert on alien life. She asked, "To see our records of the war." Kethvar began walking again. His steps echoed in the quiet hall. Dr. Li Na spent 3 days reading our files, battle reports, ship movements, casualty lists, maps of territory lost and gained. When she finished, she came to our war council. The old alien stopped and looked directly at the prosecutor. She said something that made no sense to us. She said, "We were not fighting a war. We were managing a disaster." She said we had turned a problem into a way of life. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Some beings sounded angry. Others sounded confused. Commander Han Wu stood up then. I will never forget his words. He said, "Where we come from, wars are not meant to last forever. Wars are meant to end. And if they are not ending, then you are not fighting a war. You are doing something else." The prosecutor's blue skin grew darker. Are you saying the humans criticized our war effort? No, Cathvar said. They criticized our understanding of what war was for. He moved to a window that looked out over the city below. Ships from 100 worlds filled the sky. They asked more questions. How many battles had we won? How many had we lost? How many swarm ships had we destroyed? How many of ours had they destroyed? Cathvar turned back to face the court. When we gave them the numbers, Dr. Li Na did something with a small device. She calculated. Then she showed us the results. The hall waited. In 300 years of fighting, the total number of swarm ships had not gone down. The total number of our ships had not gone up. The territory under swarm control had grown slowly, but steadily. The territory under our control had shrunk by the same amount. The prosecutor looked confused. But we won many battles. Yes, Cathvar said. We won battles. We celebrated victories. We honored our dead. But we never asked the most important question. Which was? Cathvar's old eyes seemed to see across the years. Commander Han Wu asked it. He said, "If you keep winning battles but losing the war, what does winning mean?" The hall erupted in noise. Beings called out in anger. Others argued with their neighbors. The prosecutor raised her hand for quiet. You are saying the humans insulted our military efforts? No, Cathvar said again. They were trying to understand why our military efforts existed. He walked back to the center of the room. Dr. Li Na explained it to me later. She said humans had fought many wars on their world. Some lasted for years, some for decades. But they always ended, always, because someone found a way to make the fighting stop. The prosecutor looked angry now. And you believed them? Cathvar made that sound that was not quite laughing again. I believed them when I saw what happened next. When I saw how they prepared for their first battle against the swarm. When I saw what they did that we had never thought to do. The old alien looked around the hall at all the watching faces. They did not prepare to fight the swarm. They prepared to understand it. The prosecutor opened her mouth to speak, but Cathvar continued. That is when I knew we had made a terrible mistake. We had not recruited another species to help us fight. We had invited something into our war that would change everything we thought we knew about fighting. The hall fell silent again. We had invited the humans. Cathvar's voice grew quieter as he continued his story. The beings in the great hall leaned forward to hear every word. The day we came to Earth was not a good day for the humans, he said. We did not come as friends. We came as recruiters for a war they did not know existed. The old alien's forearms moved slowly as he remembered. I was young then, only 50 years old. I served on the warship Thunder of Worlds. Our captain was Vexathani, a warrior with honor marks covering his arms. He had fought the swarm for 30 years. Cathvar looked up at the high ceiling of the court. We came out of their star's shadow just as their sun was rising over their largest continent. Their satellites saw us first. Within minutes, their entire planet was in chaos. The prosecutor listened carefully. How did they react to first contact? Like any species would react to seeing warships in their sky, Cathvar said. They were afraid. They tried to send messages. They wanted to talk, but we did not come to talk. He walked slowly around the center of the courtroom. Captain Vexthani sent the standard message. All species received the same words when we found them. By order of the Galactic Council, your species is now part of the war effort against the Devourer swarm. Prepare your military forces for immediate deployment. A being in the crowd made a sound of approval. This was how things were done. This was proper. The human sent back a message asking for time to discuss terms. Captain Vexithani laughed. He told them there were no terms. There was only the war. Kethavar stopped walking and faced the prosecutor. That is when Commander Han Wu contacted our ship directly. I was on the bridge when his face appeared on our screens. He looked calm. Too calm for someone whose world had just been conscripted into a galactic war. The prosecutor leaned forward. What did he say? He said hello. He gave his name and rank. Then he said something that confused all of us. He said, "We would like to accept your invitation to join your military alliance." Kethvar made that sound that was not quite laughing. Captain Vexithani told him it was not an invitation. It was an order. Commander Han Wu nodded and said, "We understand. But before we commit our forces, we would like to understand what we are committing to." The old alien began walking again. This was not how other species reacted. Most begged for mercy. Some tried to negotiate. Some prepared to fight us. But the humans acted like they were joining a business partnership. The prosecutor frowned. That seems reasonable. It seemed reasonable to me, too. That was the problem. It was too reasonable. Dr. Li Na came on the screen next to Commander Han Wu. She had prepared a list of questions. Kethvar counted on his fingers as he spoke. How long had the war been going on? How many species were involved? What was the enemy's strength? What were their weaknesses? What had been tried before? What had worked? What had failed? What was the current strategy? The hall was quiet as the beings listened. Captain Vexithani grew angry. He said these questions did not matter. The only thing that mattered was fighting. Dr. Li Na looked confused. She asked why questions about the enemy did not matter in a war. Kethvar stopped and looked directly at the prosecutor. Captain Vexithani told her that the swarm was just a force of nature, like a storm or an earthquake. You do not ask questions about a storm, you just fight it. The prosecutor nodded. That is correct military thinking. Dr. Li Na did not think so. She asked to see our records of swarm behavior, battle patterns, attack methods, ship designs. Captain Vexthani said that information was classified. Kethvar's old eyes seemed to see across the years. Commander Han Wu spoke very quietly then. He said, "You want us to fight an enemy you will not let us study. You want us to use strategies you will not let us question. You want us to join a war you will not let us understand." The hall grew restless. Some beings whispered to each other. Captain Vexithani said yes. That was exactly what he wanted. Commander Han Wu was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something. That chilled every being on our bridge. The prosecutor waited. He said, "That explains why your war has lasted for 300 years. Angry sounds rose from the crowd. The prosecutor raised her hand for quiet. The humans insulted our military. Leadership? No, Kethvar said. They observed it, and their observation frightened us more than any insult could have. He began walking again, his steps echoing in the quiet hall. Dr. Li Na asked one more question. She asked what would happen if the humans refused to join the war. Captain Vexthani told her their planet would be destroyed as an example to other species. HFY stopped walking. Dr. Li Na looked at Commander Han Wu. He looked back at her. No words passed between them, but I could see them making a decision. The prosecutor leaned forward. What decision? Commander Han Wu turned back to our screen. He said, "We accept your terms. Our forces will join your war effort, but we have one requirement." HFY's voice grew softer. Captain Vexthani laughed. He said conscripted species do not make requirements. Commander Han Wu nodded and said, "Then consider this a prediction instead of a requirement." The hall was completely silent now. Commander Han Wu said, "We will fight in your war. We will follow your orders. We will use your strategies. But we will not do these things forever. Wars are meant to end. If this war is not ending, we will find out why, and then we will fix it." The prosecutor looked confused. "Fix a war?" That is what Captain Vexthani asked. Dr. Li Na answered. She said wars were just very large problems that people tried to solve with violence. If the violence was not solving the problem, then the problem needed to be approached differently. HFY walked to the window again and looked out at the ships in the sky. Captain Vexthani told them they would learn to think like proper soldiers. Commander Han Wu said they hoped proper soldiers would learn to think like problem solvers. The old alien turned back to face the court. 3 days later, the first human ships arrived at the staging area for the next offensive against the swarm. I was assigned to serve as their liaison, to teach them how we fought wars. HFY made that sound again. I thought I was going to teach them about military tactics. Instead, they taught me something that changed everything I believed about fighting. The prosecutor waited. They taught me that there is a difference between fighting in a war and fighting to end a war. A very big difference. The hall waited for him to continue, and that difference would terrify every species in the galaxy. HFY walked slowly around the courtroom as he continued his story. His old feet made soft sounds on the stone floor. The human fleet arrived at Staging Base Omega 3 days after our meeting. 12 ships, small by galactic standards. Their crews numbered only 5,000 beings total. The prosecutor looked at her notes. A small contribution to the war effort. That is what we thought, HFY said. We thought they would be useful as support troops, maybe scouts. We did not think they would change everything. He stopped walking and looked up at the crowd. I was assigned to the human ship called Peace Through Understanding. The name confused our translators. In Galactic Standard, it came out as something like Calm by Learning. We thought it was a research vessel. HFY's 4 arms moved as he spoke. Commander Han Wu welcomed me aboard. The ship was different from ours. Smaller corridors, lower ceilings. But what surprised me most was how quiet it was. The prosecutor frowned. Quiet? Our warships are loud. Engines roar. Weapons charge with great noise. Alarms sound constantly. The human ship hummed softly like a sleeping creature. HFY began walking again. Commander Han Wu took me to their command center. Dr. Li Na was there with other humans. They were looking at screens showing swarm territory. The old alien stopped and faced the prosecutor. I expected to see battle plans, ship movements, attack routes. Instead, I saw something that made no sense. They were watching swarm ships that were not fighting. The prosecutor looked confused. Not fighting? The humans had sent small scout ships to watch swarm fleets when they were not in battle. Lieutenant Park Min led these missions. She would take a tiny ship and follow swarm vessels for days. Kethavar counted on his fingers. She watched how they moved between stars, how they grouped together, how they communicated, how they fed, how they rested. She studied them like a scientist studies animals. Angry sounds came from the crowd. A being shouted, "You study enemies to find weaknesses." "That is what I told Lieutenant Park Min," Kethavar said. She looked at me like I had missed something important. She said she was not looking for weaknesses. She was looking for patterns. The prosecutor leaned forward. "What kind of patterns?" "Behavior patterns. Migration patterns. Communication patterns." She wanted to understand how the swarm lived when it was not fighting us. Kethavar walked to the center of the room. "Doctor, Lena showed me recordings from these missions. Swarm ships moving in perfect formations, sharing resources, caring for damaged vessels. It looked almost like..." He paused. "Like a family. A very large family that was always moving. Always hungry. Always afraid." The prosecutor looked angry. "The swarm has no families. They are mindless destroyers." "That is what we believed," Kethavar said. "That is what we had believed for 300 years. But Dr. Lee Na asked a question no one had asked before. The hall grew quiet. She asked, 'How do we know they are mindless?' The prosecutor stood up. "Because they attack everything in their path." Dr. Lee Na nodded and asked another question. "What if they are not attacking? What if they are running?" Kethavar, let that idea settle in the minds of the listeners. The humans had a theory. What if the swarm was not trying to conquer the galaxy? What if they were trying to escape from something? Angry shouts came from the crowd. Several beings stood up and called the idea foolish. "That is what we thought too," Kethavar said when the noise died down. So Dr. Lee Na showed us something else. He walked toward the prosecutor. Captain Kim. So had captured a swarm bioship during a battle. Not destroyed it. Captured it. This had never been done before. When I asked why, Captain Kim So said they needed to examine a living specimen. The prosecutor sat down heavily. "They experimented on captured enemies?" "No," Kethavar said. "They talked to it." The hall erupted in noise. Beings shouted in different languages. Some laughed, others sounded afraid. Dr. Choi Bin was their specialist in biocommunication. She had studied how living things talk to each other. She spent weeks trying to understand how swarm ships communicated. Kethavar waited for the noise to die down. She discovered that each swarm ship was not just a vessel. It was a living being, with thoughts, with feelings, with memory. The prosecutor shook her head. "Impossible." Dr. Choi Bin played recordings for me. Sounds the swarm ship made when it was alone. Low, sad sounds, like someone crying. Kethavar's voice grew softer. She had learned to understand some of their communication. The ship was not asking for freedom. It was not threatening us. It was asking about its family. It wanted to know if its children were safe. The hall was completely silent now. I told Dr. Choi Bin this was impossible. The swarm had no families, no children. They were just bioweapons created by some ancient enemy. Kethavar looked around the courtroom. Dr. Choi Bin asked me how I knew this. I told her everyone knew this. It was common knowledge. She asked who had discovered this knowledge. When had it been discovered? How had it been proven? The prosecutor waited. I could not answer her questions. No one could. We knew the swarm was mindless because we had always known it. It was something we had believed for so long that we had forgotten it was a belief and not a fact. Kethavar began walking again. Dr. Li Na gathered all the human scientists together. They had been studying the swarm for only 2 months, but they had learned more about our enemy than we had learned in 300 years. He stopped and faced the crowd. They had learned that we were not fighting a war. We were fighting a refugee crisis. The prosecutor stood up again. "That is ridiculous." Dr. Li Na showed us the evidence. Swarm migration patterns followed no military logic. They did not try to hold territory. They did not build bases. They just kept moving in one direction through the galaxy. Kethavar pointed toward the ceiling. They were running away from something beyond our galaxy, something that had chased them across the void between stars. The hall was so quiet that the sound of breathing could be heard. The humans had discovered something that terrified them more than the swarm itself. The swarm was not our enemy. The swarm was running from our real enemy. Kethavar looked directly at the prosecutor. And that real enemy was coming this way. The prosecutor sat down slowly. What did the humans propose to do with this information? Kethavar made that sound that was not quite laughing. Something that every species in the galaxy thought was impossible. Something that violated every rule of warfare we had ever known. The hall waited. They proposed to stop fighting the swarm and start talking to them. Kethavar stopped walking and stood very still in the center of the courtroom. His old eyes looked tired as he remembered what came next. 6 months after the humans joined our war, Commander Han Wu requested a meeting with the Galactic War Council. Not a briefing. Not a report. A formal strategy presentation. The prosecutor looked at her notes. The humans had been fighting for only 6 months. Yes, Kethavar said. 6 months. We had been fighting for 300 years, but they wanted to present a new strategy to end the war. Angry sounds came from the crowd. An old Vorthak warrior stood up and shouted, "Arrogant primitives!" Kethavar nodded slowly. That is what we thought. Arrogant primitives who did not understand how war worked. We agreed to hear their presentation because we thought it would be amusing. The old alien began walking again, his steps slow and careful. The meeting was held on Command Station Alpha. Representatives from 47 species came to listen. The greatest military minds in the galaxy were there. Kethavar looked up at the high ceiling. Commander Han Wu came alone. No advisors, no guards. Just one human in a simple uniform carrying a small data pad. The prosecutor leaned forward. What did he present? First, he thanked us for allowing humans to join the war effort. Then he apologized for what he was about to say. Kethavar stopped. "Walking," he said. "We believe you have been fighting the wrong war for 300 years. The hall erupted in angry shouts. Beings called out insults in dozens of languages. The prosecutor raised her hand for quiet. He accused the military leadership of incompetence? No, Kethavar said. He accused us of fighting brilliantly against an enemy that did not exist. The prosecutor looked confused. What do you mean? Kethavar walked to the window and looked out at the ships in the sky. Commander Han Wu showed us the results of 6 months of human research. The swarm was not a military force. It was a refugee fleet. They were not conquering our territory. They were passing through it. The old alien turned back to face the court. The damage they caused was not from military attacks. It was from desperation. They consumed resources because they were starving. They fought our ships because they thought we were trying to stop them from escaping. The prosecutor shook her head. Impossible. We have records of deliberate attacks. Commander, Han Wu showed us those same records. Then he showed us what human scientists had learned by studying swarm behavior. Kethavar began counting on his fingers. Every attack happened when we blocked swarm migration routes. Every battle occurred when we cornered swarm fleets in dead-end systems. Every major offensive by the swarm happened after we destroyed their scout ships. The hall grew quiet as beings listened. Dr. Lee Na had spent 6 months learning to communicate with captured swarm bioships. She played recordings of their communications during battles. Kethvar's voice grew softer. They were not war cries. They were not battle orders. They were messages between family members, parents trying to protect children, leaders trying to guide their people to safety. The prosecutor stood up. You are asking us to believe that our enemy was innocent? No, Kethvar said. Commander, Han Wu was asking us to believe that our enemy was afraid. The old alien walked back to the center of the room. He showed us something else. Long-range scans of the void beyond our galaxy. Something was out there. Something that had been following. The swarm across the emptiness between stars. Kethvar looked around at all the watching faces. The humans had detected it 6 months ago, a presence that consumed not matter or energy, but consciousness itself. They called it the Silence. Fear moved through the crowd like a cold wind. Beings whispered to each other in worried voices. Commander Han Wu explained that the swarm had been running from the Silence for thousands of years. They had crossed the void between galaxies to escape it, but it was following them. The prosecutor sat down slowly. How long before this Silence reaches our galaxy? The humans calculated 50 years at most, probably less. Kethvar let that information settle in the minds of the listeners. Then Commander Han Wu presented his strategy, his solution to the war. The hall was completely silent. He said we should stop fighting the swarm. Instead, we should ask them to teach us how to fight the Silence. The courtroom exploded in noise. Beings shouted, in anger and fear. Some laughed at the idea, others called it madness. That was how we reacted too, Kethvar said when the noise died down. General Morthak of the High Command called it the most foolish idea he had ever heard. The prosecutor nodded. Negotiating with an enemy that has killed billions of our people. Commander Han Wu said something then that silenced the entire room. He said, "How many of your people has the swarm killed? How many has the war killed?" Kethvar walked toward the prosecutor. The numbers were surprising. Most casualties in the war came from our own actions. Ships destroyed in desperate battles, worlds evacuated and abandoned, resources spent on weapons instead of defenses. The old alien stopped in front of the prosecutor's desk. The swarm had killed millions. The war had killed billions. The prosecutor looked down at her notes. What exactly did the humans propose? A joint alliance between the galaxy and the swarm. Combine our industrial capacity with their biological technology. Stop running from the Silence and start preparing to fight it. Kethvar turned to face the crowd. General Morthak asked how we could trust an enemy. Commander Han Wu said we could not afford not to trust them. The Silence was coming whether we were united or divided. United, we might survive. Divided, we would certainly die. The hall was quiet, except for the sound of worried whispers. The War Council voted. 46 species voted against the human proposal. 1 species voted in favor. The prosecutor looked up. The humans voted for their own plan? Yes. Commander Han Wu said they would implement their strategy with or without galactic approval. Kethvar made that sound that was not quite laughing. General Morthak asked how 1 species could implement a galactic strategy. Commander Han Wu said they would start by doing something that had never been attempted in the history of the war. The hall waited. They would send an ambassador to the swarm. The prosecutor stood up slowly. They planned to make contact with the enemy? They planned to make contact with potential allies. There is a difference. Kethavar looked around the courtroom at all the watching faces. 2 weeks later, Major Song Yi led the first diplomatic mission to swarm space. Not to fight, not to spy. To talk. The old alien's voice grew very quiet. And that is when everything we thought we knew about war changed forever. Kethavar's voice became very quiet as he continued his story. The great hall was so still that every being could hear his breathing. Major Song Yi was chosen to lead the diplomatic mission because she had spent her whole life learning how to talk to beings who were different from humans. She spoke 17 galactic languages. She understood 43 different cultural systems. The prosecutor looked worried. She went alone into swarm territory? Not alone. Dr. Li Na went with her. So did Dr. Choi Bin and 12 other humans. They took the smallest ship in the human fleet, a vessel called Hope's Journey. Kethavar began, walking slowly around the courtroom. I volunteered to go with them. Commander Han Wu asked me why. I told him I wanted to see if humans were brave or just foolish. The old alien stopped and looked at the prosecutor. The journey took 6 days. 6 days flying deeper into swarm territory than any galactic ship had ever gone. 6 days moving toward our enemy instead of away from them. The prosecutor leaned forward. What did you find? We found that everything we believed about the swarm was wrong. Kethavar walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Their territory was not a wasteland of consumed worlds. It was a carefully organized migration route. Billions of bioships moving in perfect formation toward the edge of the galaxy. The old alien turned back to face the court. We followed the migration for 2 days before they noticed us. When they did not attack. They surrounded us with escort ships and guided us toward their fleet center. The prosecutor looked confused. They captured you? No. They welcomed us. Kethavar's 4 arms moved as he spoke. The center of the swarm fleet was not a warship. It was something like a city. A living city the size of a small moon. Bioships connected together in complex patterns. Gardens growing between the vessels. Children playing in the open spaces. The hall was completely silent now. Major Song Yi had prepared for this moment for months. She had learned to speak basic swarm biolanguage using sounds and chemical signals. When we docked with their city ship, she was ready. Kethavar walked back to the center of the room. The swarm leader who met us was old beyond counting. Her name translated roughly as Memory Keeper of the Long Journey. She was larger than most swarm beings, but her movements were gentle and careful. The prosecutor waited for him to continue. Memory Keeper looked at Major Song Yi for a long time without speaking. Then she made sounds that Dr. Choi Bin's equipment translated as questions. Kethavar counted on his fingers as he spoke. Why had we come? Why were we not shooting? Why did we want to talk? Were we finally ready to listen? The old alien stopped counting and looked up at the crowd. That last question surprised us. Major Song Yi asked what Memory Keeper meant by finally ready to listen. Memory Keeper made sounds that might have been laughing. Kethavar's voice grew softer. She said the swarm had been trying to communicate with galactic species for 300 years. Every time they approached our ships, we attacked. Every time they sent signals, we jammed them. Every time they tried to avoid our territory, we followed them. The prosecutor looked shocked. They were trying to communicate with us? Dr. Li Na asked to see recordings of these attempts. Memory Keeper showed us hundreds of hours of swarm, communications, signals sent toward our fleets, mathematical patterns, universal concepts, even basic pictures showing peaceful intentions. Kethvar walked toward the prosecutor. We had recorded all these signals over the centuries. Our computers had filed them as enemy communications and stored them without analysis. No one had ever tried to understand what they meant. The old alien stopped in front of the prosecutor's desk. Major Song Yi asked Memory Keeper to tell us the truth about the swarm. All of it, no matter how difficult it might be to hear. Kethvar turned to face the crowd. Memory Keeper told us a story that changed everything we thought we knew about our galaxy. The hall waited. The swarm was not from our galaxy. They had come from the galaxy next to ours, fleeing something they called the Silent Hunger, an entity that consumed consciousness itself. Kethvar's voice grew very quiet. Their original galaxy had been beautiful. Thousands of species living in peace. Great civilizations spanning millions of worlds. Art and science and culture beyond. Imagination. The old alien paused. The Silent Hunger had appeared at the edge of their galaxy like a growing darkness. It did not destroy matter. It destroyed the ability to think, to feel, to be aware. Fear moved through the crowd like a cold wind. Entire worlds became empty. Not dead, but empty. The beings still lived, but they were no longer truly alive. They moved without purpose. They spoke without meaning. They existed without consciousness. Kethvar looked around at all the watching faces. The swarm was what remained of their galaxies. Population. Billions of beings who had escaped in living ships. They had been traveling through the void between galaxies for thousands of years. The prosecutor's voice was very quiet. And this Silent Hunger followed them? Yes. It moved slowly, but it never stopped. It consumed galaxy after galaxy, leaving nothing but empty worlds and hollow beings behind. Kethvar walked back to the center of the room. Memory Keeper showed us long-range scans. The Silent Hunger had entered our galaxy 50 years ago. It was moving slowly through the outer rim, consuming worlds one by one. The hall erupted in frightened whispers. Major Song Yi asked why the swarm had not warned us. Memory Keeper made that sound like laughing again. She said they had tried. For 300 years they had tried. Kethvar's voice became angry. Every time they approached our worlds, we attacked them. Every time they tried to land and explain, we drove them away. We were so busy fighting them that we never listened to what they were trying to tell us. The prosecutor looked pale. What were they trying to tell us? That the real enemy was behind them. That we were all in danger. That we needed to work together, or we would all become empty shells walking through dead worlds. Kethvar stopped walking and stood very still. Memory Keeper asked Major Song Yi if the galaxy was finally ready to stop fighting the wrong war and start preparing for the right one. The old alien looked directly at the prosecutor. Major Song Yi said yes, the humans were ready, but she could only speak for one species out of 47. The prosecutor waited. Memory Keeper said that would have to be enough to start. One species working with the swarm was better than 47 species fighting against each other. Kethvar made that sound that was not quite laughing. That is when I realized what the humans had done. They had not just changed the war, they had changed what it meant to win. Kethvar stood very still in the center of the courtroom as he prepared to finish his story. His old eyes looked at each face in the crowd before he spoke. What happened next took 2 years. 2 years to end a war that had lasted for 3 centuries. The prosecutor leaned forward. How? The humans did what they always did. They turned a military problem into a cooperation problem. Kethvar began walking slowly around the room. Major Song Yi returned from Swarm Space with Memory Keeper and 50 other Swarm representatives. The first time in galactic history that Swarm beings had visited our worlds peacefully. The old alien stopped and looked up at the crowd. The Galactic Council refused to meet with them. General Morthak said the military would not negotiate with the enemy. 46 species supported this decision. The prosecutor nodded. The proper military response? The humans disagreed. Commander Han Wu announced that Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Military Alliance. They would form their own alliance with the Swarm. Kethvar made that sound. That was not quite laughing. General Morthak was furious. He said one primitive species and a fleet of bioships could not defend against the silent hunger. Commander Han Wu agreed. That is why they were not going to defend against it. The prosecutor looked confused. What do you mean? The humans and the Swarm were going to attack it. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. The prosecutor stood up quickly. Attack an entity that destroys consciousness itself? How? Kethvar walked toward the prosecutor's desk. Dr. Li Na had spent 2 years studying swarm biotechnology. She discovered that living ships could adapt to resist the silent hunger's effects. Not completely, but enough to fight back. The old alien stopped in front of the prosecutor. The swarm had never tried to fight because they thought it was impossible. They had only run. But the humans asked a different question. The prosecutor waited. They asked, what if running is not enough? What if we have to stop it here? Kethvar turned to face the crowd. Memory Keeper showed the humans something the swarm had hidden for thousands of years. Records from their original galaxy. The silent hunger was not invincible. It had been damaged once before. The old alien's voice grew stronger. One species in the swarm's home galaxy had found a way to hurt it. They had used consciousness itself as a weapon. Focused thought, concentrated will, the combined mental force of billions of beings working together. The prosecutor sat down slowly. Did it work? For a while, but that species tried to fight alone. The silent hunger adapted and consumed them, but it was wounded, slowed down, made vulnerable. Kethvar began walking again. The humans realized that fighting the silent hunger required more than weapons or ships. It required every conscious being in the galaxy working together, including the swarm. The old alien stopped and looked around the courtroom. For 6 months, the Galactic Council watched as humans and swarm beings worked together, building new ships, developing new technologies, preparing for a war the rest of us thought was impossible. The prosecutor leaned forward. What changed? The Council's mind? The silent hunger reached the middle rim of the galaxy. 12 worlds went silent in 1 month. Billions of beings became empty shells. Kethvar's voice grew quiet. General Morthak sent the fastest ships in the fleet to investigate. They found worlds full of people who were not people anymore. Cities where beings moved without purpose. Families who looked at each other without recognition. Fear moved through the crowd like a cold wind. The reconnaissance ships barely escaped. When they returned, their crews were changed. Some had been partially affected. They spoke in flat voices about the beauty of emptiness. The peace of not thinking. The prosecutor looked pale. What did the council do? They begged the humans for help. Kethvar walked back to the center of the room. Commander Han Wu came to the emergency session. He brought Memory Keeper with him. Together they presented a plan to stop the silent hunger. The old alien looked up at the high ceiling. Every species would contribute. Every world would participate. Military fleets would protect bioships while they carried out the real attack. The attack on the silent hunger's consciousness. The prosecutor frowned. How do you attack something's consciousness? With your own consciousness. Billions of minds thinking the same thought at the same time. Focused will direct it at a single target. HFY made that sound that was not quite laughing. The humans called it the largest prayer in galactic history. The swarm called it the Song of Defiance. The military called it Operation Unity. The old alien began walking again. It took 8 months to coordinate. Every species, every world, every being capable of conscious thought, all focused on one moment, one shared intention. The prosecutor waited to tell the silent hunger that this galaxy was protected, that consciousness here would not be consumed, that it had to go back to the emptiness between stars. HFY stopped walking and stood very still. The day came. I was on the bridge of the command ship when it happened. Billions of voices speaking as one. Billions of minds thinking as one. Billions of hearts beating as one. The hall was completely silent. The silent hunger stopped. For the first time in its existence, it encountered something it could not consume. United consciousness, shared will, the combined strength of an entire galaxy saying no. The prosecutor's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to it? It retreated, slowly, reluctantly, but it went back to the void between galaxies. It could not feed on united consciousness. HFY looked around at all the watching faces. The war was over, not because we had won battles, but because we had refused to accept that the war had to continue. The old alien walked toward the prosecutor. That is what the humans taught us. Wars do not end when one side defeats the other. Wars end when everyone involved decides to stop fighting and start solving the real problem. The prosecutor looked down at her notes. And the charges. Against the humans? HFY made that sound that was not quite laughing. You want to charge them with war crimes? They committed the greatest crime possible against the concept of war itself. The old alien stopped in front of the prosecutor's desk. They proved that war is not inevitable, that enemies can become allies, that the worst problems can be solved if everyone works together. The prosecutor looked up. Are you saying they did nothing wrong? I am saying they did something that terrified every military leader in the galaxy. They showed us that most wars are not really about winning or losing. HFY turned to face the crowd. Most wars are about being too afraid or too proud or too stubborn to find a better solution. The old alien's voice grew stronger. The humans were not afraid to talk to their enemies. They were not too proud to admit when they were wrong. They were not too stubborn to change their methods when their methods were not working. The prosecutor stood up slowly. What you are describing sounds like wisdom, not crime. HFY nodded. Yes, and that is exactly why it terrified us. The old alien looked around the courtroom one last time. We had spent 300 years fighting a war that did not need to be fought, killing beings who should have been our allies, ignoring a real threat because we were too busy fighting an imaginary one. HFY's voice became very quiet. The humans showed us that we were not warriors defending our galaxy. We were fools who had forgotten how to think. The hall was silent for a long moment. Other species fight wars to win them. Humans fight wars to make them unnecessary. The old alien made that sound that was not quite laughing one last time. That is why they terrify us, not because they are good at killing. Any species can learn to kill. They terrify us because they are good at making, killing obsolete. Kethvar walked slowly toward the exit of the courtroom. And now you know why I cannot testify against them. How do you charge someone with the crime of ending crime itself? The prosecutor watched him go. The crowd watched him go. No one spoke. The trial was over. The humans had been judged. They had been found guilty of making war impossible, and for that, the galaxy would never forgive them or forget them.